Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining, and welcome to YPO Presents Ask the Expert. My name is Florian Kemmerich. I'm managing partner at Bamboo Capital Partners, but also managing director at Capital Mobilization at Palladium. Today, I'm joined by two remarkable business leaders, Fleur Heyns and Orlan Boston. And together, we'll dive into the findings of the YPO's inaugurational Global Impact Report and share how global leaders can thrive more stable and resilient economies by prioritizing sustainable practices, equity and inclusion, and above all, purpose-driven business strategies. So this is very meaningful, not only for me personally, those who know me, but actually for the organization at large. So welcome, Fleur.
Thank you, Florian and Orlan. Nice to be with you guys again.
And
Likewise. Likewise. Good to see you, Florian and Fleur.
Amazing. We had some good time together in Kigali already on the ground. So, Fleur, let me open.
I can't believe it's only been just a few weeks since we were together.
Yes.
Seems like it was yesterday.
Absolutely. So, Fleur, just to open a little bit, you're the founder and CEO of Proof, which is an impact intelligence platform. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background and experience of the audience just to set the stage here?
Sure. Happy to. So, for those of you who were in Kigali or even Costa Rica the year before, you know that I come from the dark side. So I was an investment banker, JP Morgan, London, predominantly a little bit New York, and then went to the emerging markets. And then in South Africa, I'm actually Dutch, but I was in South Africa. I built what was one of the first large fintech platforms called Easy Equities, Easy Properties, Easy Loans, where we were making global assets available to the masses. And the intent at the time wasn't impact per se. It wasn't like, okay, we need to be inclusive. It was more about, here are millions of people, tens of millions of people who don't have access to certain products and services. And the advent of technology, in 2000 it was the internet, is going to be able to provide this opportunity. So fast forward, that became a very successful business. We sold in 2007 to a private equity firm. And then I was like, now what? I was living with my American husband in Russia, which is another topic. And we went back to my university, which is Oxford, who had at the time developed a faculty at the business school called Skoll, Skoll. And for those old enough in the audience to remember eBay, Jeff Skoll was one of the co-founders of eBay. And at the conference, the Skoll faculty had really sort of presented this notion that the sustainable growth industries, they didn't talk about impact. The word ESG was as dirty then as it is now, so it wasn't really mentioned. And effectively, they were talking about the opportunities to create viable businesses that address the major themes of solving for the world's problems. And the four themes that they brought up was climate transition and everything that comes with it, education and ed tech, specifically sustainable food and ag, and then financial inclusion. Obviously, things like healthcare, et cetera, are also very big industries to solve for, but they weren't in as much of a growth spurt or innovation need as those for industries. So to cut a long story short, since 2008, we started investing in a lot of these verticals, built some funds ourselves. And I think that the flagship that we had really proved the point of our thesis, which is we really fundamentally believe that companies who solve for these world problems and or even behave and produce in a responsible way will be future-proof, right? They will not only exist in the future, but they will even outperform in the future. And that's a big statement to make because that's saying that environmental and social impact could be another way to value companies. And from 2008 to 2018, it was a dark hole. Like we really didn't have much evidence. But suddenly, particularly in our public equity market fund, which is called Osmosis, we started getting signal that if we only looked at water, waste, and energy efficiency of the largest companies in the world, and we would invest in those, there was a correlation between that, those who were more resource efficient, and their overall stock market performance. And then obviously, once you show what they call that alpha, then the investment money trickles in, right? So then, the institutional investors suddenly go, oh, we should look at, waste, water, and energy as part of our investment selection process. And that was the first aha moment for publicly listed portfolios. But that doesn't solve for 99% of the world's business activities that equally are trying to solve for these problems, operate in these verticals, but are not being identified. So that's why we really built Proof to have a platform where private market assets, so this could be real estate, this could be infrastructure, this could be private companies, can present their environmental and social data and then get meaning out of it. Meaning so that they improve their businesses, which we'll talk about in the later part of this call, but also where they become visible to investors who are looking for those future-proof businesses.
Very interesting, Fleur. And let me double down a little bit further here, because it's interesting to understand that you're investing not focused on the financials of a company, but purely on the greater good the company actually does beyond that, which is really exciting. Moving over to you, Orlan. And again, of course, EY is a big firm. Yeah. And but I'm very much intrigued because within EY, you were the ones to focus early on and to create actually the business sustainability practice there. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, first of all, it's great to be with the two of you and the rest of the audience. But my background is in management consulting, having worked at a couple of firms as a partner in both in the areas of strategy, transformation, mergers and acquisitions. But all throughout my career, topics of sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and corporate governance have been topics that I've always infused in the work that I do with my clients, but also in the various ventures, projects, and initiatives that I've been a part of over the years. As you mentioned, Florian, I had the honor of helping to build, scale, and lead our EY America's sustainability practice for a few years, and work with some of the top corporations and organizations in the world on their sustainability strategies and their sustainability journeys. And over the years, this has entailed everything from working on various projects, initiatives, ventures that span environmental and social sustainability, as well as corporate governance, in a variety of capacities, both as a client service partner, as a former chief diversity officer for Deloitte Consulting US, as a board member on various organizations and NGOs that I support, and as a practice leader and as a senior client partner, working with some of the leading organizations and companies in the world. Some of these ventures have included books, articles, films, nonprofits, client engagements, as I mentioned, all focused really on value-led sustainability strategy, the data aspects of it, reporting, transformation, and of course, regulatory compliance as that becomes a bigger thing. And then more recently, the creation and publishing of the inaugural YPO Global Impact Report, where I got to partner with the both of you, Proof, as well as Labrador. And it was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to getting into more of what that was like and what some of our findings were in that journey and that report.
Interesting, Orlan. And let me also use this here to dig a little bit deeper, because again, it's about for us as business leaders to understand how we can drive and succeed, our own businesses strategically, but also in a greater value proposition. So again, just to remind a little bit for those of you who don't know, YPO is a global leadership community of more than 35,000 executives, chief executives in over 150 countries, driven by the shared belief that the world needs better leaders. And one of the benefits of being a YPO member is actually the opportunity to connect with leaders like Fleur and Orlan and have conversations like these here, where we can engage and exchange ideas and lifelong learning around business topics and create deeper relationships through virtual and global reach. Now, before we get started, we'd like to remind all of you watching live that you can ask our guests questions by posting them in the comment section below, and we'll answer them as time permits. So feel free to do so. Okay, over to the show. Thanks for your introduction. Let's set the stage for the audience. Fleur, Orlan, sustainability has become increasingly critical in the business landscape. So, Fleur, could you shed some light on why sustainability is now a priority actually for businesses?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways of answering the question, right? One is we're living in an environment, in an ecosystem, and it's massively at risk. So it doesn't really matter what thesis you believe in or what underlying facts you think are driving some of these changes, but the world's getting warmer, and we are seeing more and more environmental disasters happening. And I think on the social side, we have a lot of people excluded from, the markets and products and services. So there's like this macro need, coming back to my earlier point, that businesses can solve for. So that's one role. It's an opportunity to a certain extent to jump in there and create solutions. On the second hand, just more at the not so much what you build, but more how you build something, whether it's a product or how you will staff a service, matters to the users of those services. So with the new generation coming in, who some would say maybe have a little bit of the luxury, in some cases, not all, to consider various options, right? In the old days, you might only have one product provider or one car manufacturer that you can get access to. Now there are plenty of service providers for your coffee, for your clothes. If you're going to make a decision on which service provider is the most aligned with your own value system, you're going to choose one that you believe to be sustainable. And I think the word sustainable and that consumer choice at the lowest common denominator just means evidence that you're not doing harm, right? And that's why we're obviously seeing the transition from fossil fuels into more renewable electrical vehicles. But it sometimes goes beyond that, right? So I think then when you're choosing to work for a company, I was talking to one of the top VCs in Germany this morning called Planet A, and they were saying that almost half of all of the university students coming out of top degrees in Europe want to work for some climate tech related business. Now, there aren't enough climate tech related businesses that have the economic scale yet to absorb all of these. But the point being that if you're going to dedicate and devote 12 to 15 hours a day, it's got to be something that is pretty darn worth it, right? And the youngsters, and I say youngsters in the broader context, between 20 to 40-year-olds, they believe that something is worth it. It's not just only not going to do any harm, it's actually going to do something good.
So, if this is the case, so how do you think what role actually does the global impact report as such then play in this?
So that was an amazing opportunity, Florian, that you created for YPO, because you were not just the advocate, but you were the champion, and used a very strong motivation to make this happen. So in the Pulse report that YPOers respond to, I think about 2 years ago when Pascal was chairman, it came out that about 98% of YPOers want to leave a positive legacy. And the majority of them actually specifically said that they want their business to leave a positive legacy on the environment, right? So to a certain extent, by actually starting to just set baseline measurements around what we do as YPOers, how is our $9 trillion of revenue being produced? And even better, how can we make that $9 trillion work to get other things to even move better is an incredible opportunity that no other group on the planet has. So the fact that you took that, right, and started with this innovative concept that we can help YPOers not only be meaningful in our community, but increasingly as we advance the reporting and the analytics and the insights, they're going to be able to apply a lot of that in their own business. And it'll be a tremendous value add that YPO can give each individual CEO on how to not only become future proof, but actually be future success.
That's an interesting part. So if I can maybe carry that forward to you, Orlan. So as just Fleur explained, so how do you translate that? Why is fostering a sustainable business practice actually important for businesses today? Can you share something here?
Sure. So, like, I believe in what we at EY call value-led sustainability. And we call it value sustainability because we think it's critical to be looking at sustainability through the lens of the value that it brings all of your stakeholders, your shareholders, your customers, consumers, your employees, your suppliers, of course, the regulators, and the communities that you operate in. And more specifically, how can sustainability, when done correctly and embedded in your value chain, protect and create new sources of value for business, people, communities, societies, and the world at large? And for me, sustainability, similar to what Fleur said, is about doing no harm. But at its core, it's also about, as a business, are you going to be around in 5, 10,
Mm-hmm.
20, 50 years, right? From now. It's about longevity, and it's about achieving longevity in a way that is mindful of how you treat the environment, how you treat your employees, your consumers, and the communities that you operate in. And investors, lenders, insurers, they're all factoring sustainability risks and opportunities into their calculus in terms of how they want to fund, insure, and lend to your businesses. Consumers and customers, as Fleur mentioned, uh, they're choosing more and more to buy products and services from businesses that are authentically focused on sustainability and transforming their value chains and doing that in, again, an authentic way. And as you heard, I mean, like Fleur, at EY, we hire a lot of young people, a lot of graduates coming out of the college campuses, universities, and the MBA programs, the master's programs. And this is, sustainability is one of the most popular choices and desires to focus on from a career perspective that we've seen at EY in a very long time. So they are choosing where to work with this in mind. And of course, investors, customers, and employees are going to continue to make these decisions while the regulators are requiring for more and more transparency in reporting of these non-financial metrics. Right now, those regulators are focused much more on larger public companies and corporations, but that is the beginning. And as those larger public corporations, many of which YPO member companies, small, medium-sized businesses do business with, will be impacted and will be expected to also provide more and more transparency. So clarifying, measuring, and communicating the drivers of long-term value to all business stakeholders is becoming a major strategic and management priority.
Orlan, quick question. I understand that maybe we might understand that for corporations publicly listed because of the requirement to be transparent in terms of and to comply with the regulations. Now, for you just mentioned for the big bulk of YPOs where we run SMEs,
Mm-hmm.
and actually the data also being gathered. So how relevant is it actually for an SME itself to
Mm-hmm.
It
gather
is,
that information?
it is relevant for an SME because many SMEs have customers who are large companies. And as a supplier to to another business, you are part of their scope 3 emissions. And increasingly, these large companies are having to report on their scope 3 emissions. They're having to look at issues such as double materiality. A lot of this is in the in Europe, where Europe really is leading the way here from a transparency perspective, and they are requiring their suppliers and making choices about who to work with from a supply perspective and a vendor perspective based on your ability to be transparent, based on your commitments to transform your own value chains to be greener and much more sustainable. And so they're asking for that data because they also got to report on it. Some of them have to report on it. Some of them take it a step further and want to report on it for all these reasons that we've discussed. So yes, there are impacts for small and medium-sized enterprises as it relates to reporting from a corporate perspective from some of these regulatory standards that are now being enacted in places like the EU. CSRD is a perfect example of that.
Thanks, Orlan. So, and thank you for that overview here. Now, let's delve in a little bit into the findings of the Global Impact Report. And Orlan, the report reveals that many companies supported environmental metrics less frequently than social and governance metrics, and suggested also potential lack of resources and understanding of how to report these issues amongst SMBs or SMEs. Quick thing, if we understand that with about 1,000 companies registered now on that survey, 700 plus have actually been able to divide data. So we see there is learning progress. Now, of course, you want to push that further for the next iteration of the report. But Fleur, why do you think is this the case, and how can businesses actually improve their environmental reporting practices?
Yeah. So again, it's an interesting conundrum, right? That 98% of YPOers say they want to leave a lasting legacy, positive legacy on the climate and the environment, and the most basic calculation, which is your carbon emission, was a real challenge for most of them. And I think that is something because unless you're already on a journey towards transition, right, and this becomes a factor that you are monitoring on a monthly basis, and you already have that trajectory with your business, it seems a little bit like, a side graph that isn't really that relevant. So we have to shift the focus. I mean, if you think of it a little bit like a health program, like I'm sure most of us have read the Outlive book by Peter Attia or David Sinclair, who's How to Live Healthier Longer. They talk about three aspects, right, that a physical body must do in order to be a healthier body. One is put yourself into physical extreme. Two, make sure that you get the right proteins in. And three, reduce your stress, right? Very simple. Well, for companies, it's the same thing. In order to be, as Orlan mentioned, sustainable for the future, exist despite all of the turmoil that we have around us, they need to focus on all three in order to be a successful business. And the environmental one, which is almost like the exercise component, go and do the cold water plunge, has been neglected because it's hard in the beginning. It's not an easy thing to immediately adopt. And that's something that we now have to teach them. The second one, which is really about make sure you have good inputs, right, is about your ability to assess your raw materials. And that business leaders are a little bit more familiar with because they know that what they put into their products and businesses is going to reflect in the output in the product. So that's been more ingrained. But the third one, which is the stress-free component, which in a business you could almost compared to having good productivity, like having a synergistic, inspiring work environment that is a little bit less tangible to measure and implement. Again, people don't know how to measure that so well because it wasn't taught in business school as a main driver for business success. So our challenge now is those two areas, the environment and the social side, not so much the business productivity side. We need to educate them on what is the process and what are the tools that you can use in order to get insights around those two, because if you get those two right as well, it will advance your business again.
So that's an interesting learning here, especially as, I personally had the difficulties actually to provide this data and then to understand where do I get it. Now, would you have within your experience, on the impact measurement here? So what are the key metrics businesses actually can start tracking towards a sustainable future?
So the core basic minimal that's already being enforced now by a lot of the regulators, particularly in Europe, you have something called the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Requirements. There are 14 metrics, right? So there are 9 that are obligatory, and then you have 5 that are optional. And 7 of them are environmental, 2 of them are social. So the basic metrics that almost every company should start tracking is what Orlan referred to as Scope 1 and Scope 2 carbon emissions. So this is, how much energy do you utilize and therefore carbon do you emit, or what is associated with your business, like employees coming in and out of work, executives flying, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just Scope 2. Scope 3 is a much more challenging because Scope 3 is what is the Scope 1 and Scope 2 of your supply chain provider so that you have a full picture of your energy profile. So Scope 1 and Scope 2 are sort of minimal requirements. And as you say, Florian, they're hard because they require multiple data inputs. So you need to have utility information, like where's your energy sourcing coming from? What is the energy source? So in the US and Europe, it's often defined on your utility bill. In other countries, it may not, and you don't know the actual component that's coming from those specific sources, let alone, measuring where your employees are driving or cycling in and out from. So it is complex, right? And it is something that requires effort, but there are a lot of tools and guidelines on how to do it. Then the other one that I think is going to be instrumental in the future is water consumption, particularly if you're more on the manufacturing side, because water is becoming a rare commodity and it's going to get priced that way. So again, we're looking at it from an economics perspective, not just about saving water supply in the world. It's about the operating margin that you're affecting if you don't look after your water. Waste often is already considered from a manufacturing and production perspective because you want to have, again, high operating margins, but actually the ability for companies to do waste management calculations is even lower than the carbon emissions. It's one of the most tricky ones for them to respond to because it's hard to measure everything that comes into your business. Like that has to be part of your workflow process. And then you go more into the diversity one. So what is the composition of your management team? What is the composition of the employees? The big one that I think is really important is gender equality. So do you pay both male, female the same within a business? And actually on all of the social metrics, YPO scored way above the benchmark. So even though in YPO, we seem to have this challenge about attracting female members, or we have a relatively below, total contribution of women into the workforce as CEOs. We only have, I think, 9% that are female CEOs as members. Combined male and female YPO members hire a lot of women above benchmark in their management teams and are also very, very good at wage equality. So men and women get paid almost equal in the YPO context. And then let's not forget that those are very basic standard ones, minimal, viable, almost I would call them ESG-like requirements. And then as we go into industries, sustainable food and ag, energy transition, financial inclusion, education, healthcare, there are going to be a lot more specific KPIs that really matter as indicators for impacts and success in those specific verticals.
So in that sense, maybe Orlan, over to you. How can businesses actually adapt just based on these things to better track those data and make an impact?
So look, I think it is important to realize, and we saw this right when through the global impact report and securing that data. It is not easy for small and medium sized organizations to collect this data, but there are ways to do that actually, and so some of those can include working with existing industry standards and the organizations that have provided some of those resources. And so that can include the Global Reporting Initiative, which has widely used reporting standards that provide frameworks for organizations to report on some of these environmental, social, and governance metrics. Of course, SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, more from a finance perspective, the Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, the Carbon Disclosure Project, they all provide resources and tools for organizations to get started. And as you get more mature in how you want to track this and communicate this, you can also consider establishing science-based targets. And the Science-Based Target Organization also provides the methodologies for doing that. Much of this actually is free and is accessible for organizations and small, medium-sized businesses to take advantage of. However, look, I would say there are a few best practices I would recommend, and we recommend to many of our larger clients that I think are applicable to small, medium-sized businesses. And so that includes, again, understanding who your key stakeholders are, right, and what their interests are. and be deliberate and consistent in how you engage them throughout this process. Uh, Ensuring transparency, so communicating what you can and doing that as accurately as you can. Focusing on what's material to your business. There are thousands of metrics out there. There are tons of different reporting standards out there. That's part of the challenge that businesses and companies and corporations face, and that is fortunately getting better as the regulators are stepping in to define those key non-financial metrics that are going to be required for reporting. But focusing on what's material to your business is really important, and understanding what's material to your business, but also what's material to your key stakeholders. Fleur talked a bit about the data strategy and collection aspect of this. And so coming up with data enablement techniques on how you collect data on your current state of topics that are material. And oh, by the way, with our global impact report, we were fortunate enough to be able to work with Proof and that dashboard and platform that allowed many of our small and medium sized YPO companies to report and actually start their journey on reporting. So there are a number of platforms out there, but Proof is the one that absolutely does focus on private companies, small, medium sized businesses. And so doing that reporting and data collection in a consistent and a comparable way, because ideally you want to be, that's your first benchmark. What we did with the Global Impact Report for YPO, it's inaugural, which means it is a baseline now for how YPO is going to measure impact along environmental, social, and governance metrics for YPO member companies going forward. And so, as you become more mature in this regard, you can also bring in third-party assurance or independent assurance. So a third party that can verify what you are reporting. And so all of this is not just about reporting. At the end of the day, this is about business. It's about integrating sustainability into your purpose, into your mission, and into your strategy and how you do business with your most important key stakeholders.
So, Orlan, actually, that builds also, we have a question here from the audience in that same direction. The question is, how can global companies that operate in many countries keep up with differences in regulations and reporting? So are there any best practices or industry standards you would point out, that organizations can actually follow to enhance their environmental reporting practices, for example?
So quite simplistically, I would say, and this is something that I've talked to a number of my clients about. Now, my clients tend to be, our clients tend to be much larger corporations, but they say, okay, yes, waiting for the U.S. SEC to fully roll out what they are going to be requiring of companies. In Europe, CSRD was already out the gate. If you are a company that's operating in both Europe and the US, well, you're going to have to report probably a lot more based on what CSRD requires than what the SEC is going to require. And so, you probably need to be focused more on CSRD. If you get CSRD requirements right from a reporting perspective, then you're going to take care of some of the other parts of the world which aren't as comprehensive in what they are going to be asking of companies to report. So looking at sort of the minimum, but the minimum is if you're doing business in Europe, that's going to need to be your minimum base of reporting, depending on whether or not you meet the thresholds for reporting on CSRD.
That's quite insightful. But if we now look at, we've been speaking a lot here about the E of the ESG. Now, if we look at the G, which is actually the governance side, this is actually the foundation of embedding sustainability throughout an organization. So, Fleur, how can businesses balance the need for an accurate environmental reporting with the resources and time constraints often associated with the data collection and the analysis itself?
Yeah. So there's two components to it. As Orlan just said, you may not have a choice but make an investment in environmental reporting because otherwise you won't be able to operate or sell product or find investors. So it's getting to the point where the challenge isn't so much as per the question, international differences, like they're actually pretty marginal. The main standards are global. So that's really easy. And most of the frameworks and metrics will be interpreted global. You sometimes have some national development programs and they get then layered on top. But coming back to the governance side, so you as a board, right, are going to have to adhere to whatever the minimal requirements are for environmental reporting in the business areas and jurisdictions that you operate in. That's going to be a requirement, your fiduciary duty, to make sure that that's in place. And no one likes to operate under the stick, right? So we want to find more of a carrot angle to it. And that gets me back to this example I gave earlier on, which is like, fund managers actively selecting assets, investments that have certain environmental KPIs being more attractive assets. Now, we don't have a huge amount of data on this yet because it's only starting, but the expectation is that those companies that will report, right, on their sustainability will do better on their sustainability KPIs and therefore will be better businesses. So I'll give you an example of like in the automotive sector, everyone always thinks of Tesla, right, as the groundbreaking environmental car company. Well, actually, from a resource efficiency perspective, Tesla's the worst automobile company in the world, right? So the amount of energy, waste, and water consumption per car is enormous. BMW has been reporting on their sustainability for over 33 years. Their amount of waste per car now is 10 grams. I think that's an ounce for the Americans. 1 ounce of waste for each car produced. That makes it a very, very solid, robust, what else would you think from the Germans, company, right? For investors who are looking at seeing reduced risks in environments where natural resources are going to be more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, you're going to have to focus on it because you have no choice and you won't actually be compliant if you don't put this in place now. But at the same time, there should be enough of a carrot that you would either get more access to capital or you might even get better funding terms. Because don't forget, all of the banks have also signed these, climate commitments that they're going to be net zero by 2030 or God forbid 2050. Who knows what happens by then? So if you want to go and borrow money from a bank, you become their balance sheet. So if you can't show that you are on a net zero trajectory as a borrower, you're not a viable customer for that bank anymore.
A lot of big changes here. This is again also when we look on the European side, the SFDR regulations, especially from an investment point of view, whether it's ESG or whether it's actually or even into impact investing goes the same sense. Now, Orlan, question here on that. So how can companies actually ensure transparency and the accuracy? We've heard a lot about greenwashing, and these topics where certain things are just bragged outside from an attractive and marketing perspective, but not necessarily. But how can they actually ensure that the environmental reporting process is to build the trust with the stakeholders, and what are the benefits around them?
So look, there are a few things. One, adopting recognized frameworks, right? So we've talked about a few of those, and using these established reporting frameworks like GRI or like the Carbon Disclosure Project. These are recognized and they are respected reporting frameworks. Two, and I alluded to this, third-party verification. Getting an independent auditor to verify what you're reporting translates into more transparency and I think more trust. Um, Training and capacity building within your own organization. So investing in training of your own staff on sustainability issues, how to go about that, how to go about accurate data collection, and these reporting methods is really important. At EY, we've trained all of our employees, from partners all the way down, on Sustainability 101, Sustainability 201, 301. So building that internal knowledge base by educating and investing in training is important. Otherwise, you're not, no one in your company is speaking the same language. Using reliable metrics and KPIs, and again, those that are material to you and your most important stakeholders. Obviously, investing in technology and software, as we've talked about, continuing to engage your stakeholders and doing that in a regular way where you are actually listening to what's important to them, what's material to them, and then just communicating transparently. Publish what you know, what you have, and even be honest about what you don't have and what you're working on getting to be able to report. And then this is really a continuous improvement process where each year you're going to get better. Yes, the expectations are also going to get higher, but each year you're going to get better. So benefits of transparent and accurate reporting, of course, is going to be everything from enhancing your company brand and reputation to increasing the confidence of your investors and other stakeholders, complying with regulatory requirements. Ideally, there would be more carrots than sticks, but there are sticks. Those sticks will be enforced over time. I think there will be grace periods for organizations and companies that are showing a true effort in trying to comply. But the carrots and sticks are real. Risk management, understanding what those risks are to your organization and your value chain from a sustainability perspective is a benefit. You want to know that, right? You want to put in place effective risk mitigation strategies in place, and so all sorts of things. Your ability to attract talent and be an employer of choice, new market opportunities. So we oftentimes talk a lot about the risk and compliance side of the equation, but then there's the innovation and commercial and growth opportunities coming by infusing sustainability into your entire value chain, especially your commercial and innovation and technology function. So these are some of the benefits I would say that come with transparent and accurate reporting.
That's very helpful for us then also to better understand different components. Now, before we quickly move over, one question here, or and just the last one here is, what industries are doing a good job in terms of sustainable? Do we have any examples here, just on a high level, to answer a question here from the audience?
So look, I turn to the certainly the financial services industry in many ways. When you think of ESG and the ESG frameworks, those come from the investor community. That they don't necessarily come from the environmental community. They come from the investor community. They were a set of non-financial metrics that they felt were important to start evaluating company profiles. And so financial services, we've seen organizations on the asset management side, some banks putting, again, pretty bold stakes in the ground about what they're going to lend to, the types of companies they're going to lend to, and the types of companies they're going to invest in, and the types of companies that they're going to insure. On the consumer side, I think the consumer sector is one of the most progressive in this regard because of the demand from consumers for more sustainable products and services. And I think a lot of the great innovation that we're seeing is coming out of consumer in terms of packaging, in terms of ingredients that are used, in terms of specific source materials for that go into their value chain and the supply chain. So those are a couple. There are others, but those are a couple that come to mind.
Thanks, Orlan. Very quickly, and again, we're running here against the clock, 15 minutes left, but just changing on the overall arching, and you mentioned this before, Fleur, on diversity, equity, and inclusion itself. When you experience, why is fostering diversity inclusion important for businesses? And what advice do you have for leaders, how they can actually move the needle here on representing and representation and inclusion in the workspace?
Yeah, so firstly, the baseline is shocking, right? So I think less than 2% of VC funding goes to female or diverse founders, which is not acceptable. So if you think that is already a starting point, we need to change some of that, because other data, and there's several Harvard reports, which we must confess are a little bit more difficult to establish correlation between diversity metrics and financial results. But by and large, it seems to indicate that companies that have more diverse management teams have a lower risk profile, better operating margins, and more likely to break even faster on the startup side. So these are obviously nice success indicators, but they're correlations, right? They're not causation. So that's a big thing to point out on the DEI side.
Yeah, and I
That's
look, and I would add also, on the corporate side, there is a rich body of research around the business case for diversity at the highest levels of companies and all the way down. Those companies that have higher levels of diversity, well, you know what? There are correlations between their stock price, their growth, their return on capital, their brand. And a lot of that's credited to the diversity of thought and experiences that come with more diverse employees and leaders, and just diversity and inclusion in general in these companies.
that's very helpful. Um, Quickly focus also on the concept of business as a force for good. We use that terminology in YPO a lot. Leadership as a force for good on an individual leader, business as a force for good, and then, of course, you have the investment side, also capital as a force for good. But I'm curious about how do you define the concept of business as a force for good? What does that actually mean to you personally? Sure.
So you want me to go first?
Yep, Orlan,
All
come
right.
on in.
So look, to me, this concept means that you can do well by doing good. And specifically, you can grow your scale, your revenues, and profit while also taking care of your employees, being ethical in your business practices, being environmentally conscious, being a good partner to your suppliers, and just being a positive force in the communities you operate. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both, and when you do both is when the magic really happens. So that's what it means to me.
And to you, Fleur?
Yeah, so it was the reason I got into this space, right? It was the wake up call I got in Oxford at school, which is this is no longer just opposed to each other. They can absolutely be in a win win relationship. But you have to recognize that you can't optimize for both all the time, which is again why it's so important to have more frequent, detailed analytics and insights so that you know, oh, now I am optimizing for, resource efficiency, but there comes a point where I'm actually not growing as fast anymore, or I didn't have the energy supply needed because there's only so much solar panels that could be producing the energy I need. So these balances are need to be considered. But I just think that we wouldn't be proud of ourselves and we wouldn't be able to have a conversation with our next generation if we didn't believe this, if we didn't act on it, and if we didn't collectively start showing what the impact of our collective results are going to be by taking this kind of approach.
That's beautiful. Again, in my sense, one of the questions is actually to say, you know, what's your personal legacy beyond the family and the bank account? I think then you want to start really thinking into how can I leverage what I do, in the best way beyond. And that's where I actually like the word legacy because it's much more and much deeper and at the bigger scale. Because Flora, you're mentioning collective. The word collaboration is key to driving positive change. And this helps business actually achieve a greater impact than they could go alone. Now, Orlan, how can business leaders actually leverage collective influence and the resources to address these global challenges in your experiences, and what factors contribute to those successful collaborations?
Well, look, I think when it comes to confronting the biggest challenge of I think our lifetime for the human race, business absolutely will be playing a role here, and it is about collaboration. Um, Business will be vital in ensuring that many of these big commitments that governments have made at global forums actually turn into tangible action, whether it's at COPs and other forums, but actually on the ground within economies, within industries and sectors. And so both public and private and company to company collaborations are going to be needed. All companies have a role to play, no matter where they are on their evolution to a green transition, and so that can take many forms in terms of how companies activate capital, how they create new technologies, how they can report to help other companies achieve their climate goals, and so it's there's a role for everyone to play, and that can take many different forms. Collaborative partnerships, where companies come together with governments, NGOs, to share knowledge, expertise, and financial resources. It could be industry consortia or sector specific consortia. It can be alliances that are focused on innovation, that bring together academic institutions, startups, research organizations that are trying to solve some of the key challenges associated with this transition to green. It can be on the advocacy and policy engagement side as well. So there's a lot of different ways where companies can come collaborate, not only amongst other companies, but the nonprofit, government, NGO, and academia.
That's helpful. Fleur, on your platform, you have thousands of companies. I mean, not just the YPO ones, but beyond. So, do you have some successful examples within or beyond YPO just to point out, also on the collaborative part?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's often great to look at nature, right, as our golden example of how to function, right, as being part of nature. And David Attenborough says it so beautifully. He's like, it's time we moved out of an ego system or an egocentric system into an ecosystem, right? So an ecosystem where you just have all of the participants who are more in tune with each other's needs and feed them in a better way. So the way that the platform actually, and a lot of the YPO clients that are on the platform have been able to leverage that synergy is often in a GP portfolio company relationship. So, where you have a portfolio manager who has to report to their LPs, and then they have to collaborate with their underlying portfolio companies to collectively decide on what Orlan, for instance, mentioned, what is financially material, right? If they just operate under their own selfish desire, I have a reporting requirement, give me these 1,000 metrics, or otherwise I'm going to make your next funding round hell, that's obviously not a very constructive way to collaborate to go to the collective good. Whereas if through these, discovery of these insights, we can, with the GP and the portfolio companies, identify, for instance, what are the KPIs that are material to do successful lending to financial institutions that want to be inclusive. Like, what matters? What are the KPIs of the demographic? Should they be male, female? Should they be rural, urban? Should they be in growth industries? By collectively identifying that and just honing in on capturing what actually matters, you can then actually create an environment where both thrive. The GP shows and performs exceptional because the portfolio companies are tracking and performing on what matters to the success of their businesses. They have lower default rates because they've got the right demographic, and they have a higher growth opportunity because they're servicing audiences that have been neglected by incumbents. So that's one aspect of it. And I think what we're also finding is there's another company that is more in the pharmaceutical delivery business in YPO, I think about $300 million business. They just started with looking at it from a selfish, I need to do my ESG reporting, right? I need to do that because that's what's required. And then when they realized the type of information they were getting back, and ESG often is associated with risk mitigation, right? So do no harm. Whereas impact is like, how do I contribute? Because they were getting the data in a format which didn't cost them an arm and a leg, right? And which was live, which makes it more engaging. They started looking at what other things could we be doing internally or externally which starts going into the impact direction, that could also have a positive impact on our business. So how do we engage, as Orlan said, with our stakeholders, our community of suppliers, our community of other buyers, that makes all of us more successful? So this is definitely, I think, the ecosystem and the interoperability of all these technology platforms is going to play a major role in the collaboration.
That's very helpful. And again, especially I think within YPO, you have the YPO Impact Report, you have the YPO Impact Summit, you have the also YPO networks, the business networks, but also the impact networks. There's a lot to learn and engage in that same collaboration. Thank you for both of you for sharing your experience here with the audience today. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you one last question. As a member of YPO, what benefits have you and your family enjoyed by belonging to this community? And what do you think founders, entrepreneurs, and business leaders can gain by belonging to this type of organization? Fleur, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I've been in YPO since 2006, I think. I started in Moscow, then London, now Cape Town, and our joint chapter, Florian, the North Star chapter. So it's been instrumental. I think the sharing of ideas, thoughts, but now actually even more specifically, North Star chapter, for those who don't know, is a chapter which has impact as a commonality. It doesn't matter what legal structure you operate under, a business, NGO, etc. We all have purpose and driving impact as our goal. And I think there we've created already a community who are spearheading this thought, not just in talk, but in action, of building businesses that really act as a force for good, not only in their own markets, but I think also for YPO to start showing that they are leading by example in terms of what the future of a good business looks like. And I think that's the only way YPO will keep attracting new talent. To my point about European graduates only wanting to work for climate change, new members who want to come in want to see that this is a leading organization that follows those, aspiring principles.
Beautiful. And Orlan, on your end?
So I've been a YPO member now for 3 years. I'm a member of the America's Gateway chapter, and it's been quite powerful to see how this incredible network, resources and experiences that have been provided to me and my family, but to me as a senior business leader, and I realize I'm just still scraping the surface. There's just such an immense set of resources available to you. Uh, but the things that stand out for me is the network, just the power of each of the YPO member companies and the founders and CEOs and senior executives that bring just incredible experience, perspective, and energy to making this network as powerful and as impactful as it is. But also the friendships I learned. I've made some great friends, including the two of you, by being part of YPO. Constantly learning because there's just such a diversity of sectors and parts of the world that are represented in this massive YPO network. And so these are all things that have been I found really valuable as being part of YPO, but also just the ability to make an impact and to come together like we have with this inaugural YPO Global Impact Report, which we know will be in place long after the three of us have checked it in, right? That's the goal in terms of leaving legacy that makes a difference and will make future generations proud of what we are doing today.
Definitely it is, and it will. Thank you, Orlan. Thank you, Fleur. Thank you for all who tuned in today to be part of this conversation. You can download and dive deeper into the Global Impact Report on ypo.org. Please have a look. There's a lot of rich information. If you found this episode informative, please share it with your network. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, or YouTube so you can be one of the first people to learn about our next episode. I'm Florian Kemmerich, and this was YPO Presents the Presence Ask the Expert. Thank you for watching, and see you all soon.
Thanks, Florian.